The coffee mug hit the desk with a sharp clink, spilling dark liquid across the morning reports. Sarah Martinez didn't flinch as Ranger Captain Blake Morrison towered over her workspace. His weathered face twisted in frustration. "Martinez, where the hell are my incident files from last week? The district supervisor is breathing down my neck, and I've got senators asking questions about our response times. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Sarah calmly reached into her filing cabinet, pulled out a pristine manila folder, and placed it in front of Morrison without looking up from her computer screen. "Filed under Weekly Incidents, March 2024, Captain. Same place they've been for the past 3 years I've worked here." Morrison snatched the folder and stalked away, muttering something about desk jockeys under his breath. Sarah continued typing her report, her fingers moving with practiced precision across the keyboard. Around her, the Cascade National Forest headquarters buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Monday morning. Sarah had been the administrative coordinator at the ranger station for 3 years, though everyone simply called her the receptionist. It was a title that followed her like a shadow, reducing her college degree in forestry management and her extensive knowledge of wilderness survival to nothing more than answering phones and filing paperwork. She'd applied for a ranger position 17 times in those 3 years. 17 rejections, each one citing her lack of field experience despite her weekend hiking trips that covered more terrain than most rangers saw in a month. The irony wasn't lost on her that she knew the forest better than many of the men who wore the badge. She'd grown up in these mountains, learned to track deer before she could ride a bike, and could identify every tree species, wildlife pattern, and dangerous terrain feature within a 50-mile radius. But none of that mattered when you sat behind a desk instead of carrying a radio in the field. Ranger Jake Williamson burst through the front doors, his uniform dusty and his face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, you need to get Morrison on the radio right now. We've got a situation developing up on Crystal Ridge." Sarah immediately switched to protocol mode, her casual demeanor shifting to sharp professionalism. "What's the nature of the emergency?" "Williamson? Missing hikers. The family of 4 didn't return to their campsite last night. Their car's still at the Whitewater Trail parking area, but there's no sign of them past the 3-mile marker." Jake ran his hands through his sandy hair, leaving tracks in the dust. "The Weather Service is calling for a severe storm system moving in tonight. If we don't find them before dark. Sarah was already pulling up topographical maps on her computer, her mind racing through possibilities. Crystal Ridge was notorious for its sudden weather changes and treacherous terrain. The Whitewater Trail seemed simple enough for day hikers, but it connected to a maze of unmarked paths that could lead inexperienced visitors deep into wilderness areas where cell service disappeared and temperatures dropped 30 degrees after sunset. "Have you checked the Peterson Creek tributary? Most lost hikers follow water sources when they panic," Sarah asked, highlighting potential search areas on her digital map. Jake looked surprised. "How did you?" "Yeah, that's exactly where Morrison wants us to start. You know that area?" Before Sarah could answer, Captain Morrison's heavy footsteps echoed across the floor. "Williamson, get your gear. We're mobilizing a full search team. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Davis are already suiting up." His eyes barely glanced at Sarah as he grabbed his radio equipment. "Martinez, start calling the volunteer search and rescue teams. We'll need every available body for this one." "Captain." Sarah stood up from her desk. The weather patterns show the storm hitting the northern face first. If the family took the wrong fork at mile marker 4, they could be trapped in the Deadfall Canyon system. The radio dead zones there will make communication nearly impossible once the storm hits. Morrison paused, his hand halfway to his equipment. "Belt, how exactly would you know about radio dead zones, Martinez?" Sarah felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. I've hiked every trail in this sector, sir, multiple times. I know where the communication blackouts occur and which areas become impassable during severe weather. A snort came from across the room where Ranger Tom Davis was checking his backpack. Hiking on weekends isn't the same as real search and rescue work, sweetheart. This isn't a nature walk. The other rangers chuckled, and Sarah felt that familiar knot tighten in her stomach. 3 years of proving herself. 3 years of being the most knowledgeable person about forest conditions and trail systems. And she was still seen as nothing more than the woman who answered their phones. Morrison checked his watch. We don't have time for debates. Martinez, make those calls. Williamson, Davis, Thompson, Rodriguez, you're with me. We'll establish a command post at the Whitewater parking area and work our way up from there. As the team gathered their equipment, Sarah quietly pulled up the detailed geological survey maps on her computer. She'd spent countless hours studying these formations, understanding how weather patterns affected different elevations and how panicked hikers typically move through unfamiliar terrain. The missing family had most likely taken the scenic route toward Eagle's Nest Overlook, but when the trail became difficult, they would have naturally gravitated toward what appeared to be easier paths. Those paths led directly into the most dangerous section of the forest. "Excuse me, Captain," Sarah called out as Morrison headed toward the door. "I've identified 3 high-probability zones where the family might have taken shelter. The cave systems near Deadfall Canyon would be their most logical choice if they're trying to wait out the weather, but those caves connect to underground streams that flood during heavy rainfall." Morrison stopped and turned around slowly. "Martinez, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have trained professionals handling this situation. Your job is to coordinate communications and maintain contact with headquarters." Sarah bit back her response, watching as the 5-man team headed out into conditions that were already deteriorating. Through the office windows, she could see dark clouds gathering over the mountain peaks, and she knew from experience that they had maybe 4 hours before the full storm system hit. 4 hours to find a family that could be anywhere within a 20-square-mile area of some of the most challenging terrain in the Pacific Northwest. She made the required calls to volunteer search teams, coordinated with the county sheriff's office, and established communication protocols with the State Emergency Management Agency. But as she worked, her eyes kept drifting to the topographical maps, to the areas she knew the official search team would miss, to the places where scared people would instinctively seek shelter without understanding the deadly risks they were walking into. The radio crackled to life around noon. Morrison's voice came through in bursts, interrupted by static from the increasing atmospheric pressure. "Base ... This is Search Team Alpha ... No sign of family at primary coordinates, expanding search pattern to..." The transmission cut out, leaving only white noise. Sarah tried multiple times to re-establish contact, switching between frequencies and adjusting the antenna orientation. Nothing. She knew exactly what had happened. They'd moved into the radio shadow zone she'd warned them about, the area where the granite formations blocked most communication signals. 20 minutes later, Jake Williamson's voice broke through the static. "Base, this is Williamson. We've lost contact with Morrison and half the team. Repeat, we have lost contact with the Alpha team. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, and visibility is dropping fast." Sarah grabbed the microphone. "Williamson, what's your current position?" "We're at the junction of Whitewater and Carson Creek trails. The trail markers are barely visible through the fog, and we're getting reports of possible rock slides blocking the upper routes." Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain. The junction was exactly where she'd predicted they'd encounter problems. The official trail maps showed it as a simple Y intersection, but the reality was far more complex. There were at least 6 different paths leading away from that junction, 3 of which dead-ended at cliff faces, and 2 that led into box canyons that became death traps during severe weather. Williamson, you need to mark your current position and establish a safety line before proceeding. The terrain past that junction becomes extremely hazardous, especially with reduced visibility. Copy that, base, but Sarah... We really need someone up here who knows these trails intimately. The GPS units are giving us conflicting readings, and some of these paths aren't on our standard maps. Sarah stared at the radio, knowing that she was probably the only person within 50 miles who could navigate those trails in current conditions. She'd walked every path, knew every landmark, understood the subtle differences between safe routes and deadly detours. But she also knew that suggesting she join the search team would be met with the same dismissive attitude she'd faced for 3 years. The afternoon wore on with sporadic radio contact and increasingly desperate updates. The volunteer search teams were being turned back by dangerous conditions. The state emergency helicopter couldn't fly in the deteriorating weather. And somewhere in the growing storm, a family of 4 was running out of time while the people trained to save them struggled to navigate terrain that Sarah could traverse blindfolded. As the office grew darker and the wind began howling through the mountain passes, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She quietly gathered her emergency gear from her car, the professional-grade equipment she'd accumulated over years of serious hiking. Weather-resistant clothing, GPS devices, emergency shelter, first aid supplies, and climbing gear that most of the rangers didn't even own. She left a detailed note explaining her actions and locked the office behind her. If Morrison wanted to fire for abandoning her post, so be it. But she wasn't going to sit behind a desk while people died. Because of professional pride and gender bias, the storm was already unleashing its fury as Sarah drove toward the Whitewater Trail parking area, her hands steady on the steering wheel. Despite the gravity of what she was about to attempt, she'd spent 3 years being treated as invisible, 3 years having her knowledge dismissed, 3 years being told she wasn't qualified for real ranger work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tonight, she was going to prove them all wrong. Proceed with part 3. Make sure each part has around 1,000 to 1,500 words, since we are aiming for a 150-minute video duration, and please keep in mind that we should avoid repetitions so that we can engage with our viewers. Wind-driven rain hit Sarah's face like needles as she stepped out of her vehicle at the Whitewater Trail parking area. The official search vehicles were scattered across the lot: Morrison's truck, the emergency response trailer, and 2 volunteer fire department SUVs with their emergency lights cutting through the growing darkness. But the parking area was eerily quiet except for the howling wind and the steady drumbeat of rain on metal. Sarah pulled her waterproof hood tight and approached the command trailer. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see Williamson, hunched over a radio, his face illuminated by the green glow of communication equipment. She knocked on the door, and Jake's surprised face appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing here? Morrison is going to lose his mind when he finds out you left your post. Where is Morrison?" Sarah asked, stepping into the cramped trailer and immediately assessing the tactical maps spread across the small table. Red pins marked the locations where search teams had already looked. Blue pins showed current team positions. The pattern told her everything she needed to know about why they weren't finding the missing family. "That's the problem." Jake ran his hands through his wet hair. "We lost radio contact with his team 3 hours ago. Last transmission had them heading up toward Eagle's Nest, but that was before the weather really hit. Davis and Rodriguez are with him, but Thompson twisted his ankle on some loose shale and had to turn back." Sarah studied the map, her mind automatically calculating distances, elevation changes, and probable routes. "They're searching too high up the mountain. The Hendrickson family. That's the missing group, right? Parents in their 40s with 2 teenagers? Yeah, how did you know their names? I read their trail permit application this morning while you were all getting ready. David Hendrickson, 47, software engineer from Portland. Wife Jennifer, 44, marketing consultant. Daughter Emma, 16. Son Michael, 14. They listed their experience level as moderate and estimated a 6-hour round trip to Eagle's Nest Overlook. Jake stared at her. You memorized all that from a permit application? Sarah was already tracing routes on the topographical map with her finger. The problem is, they never intended to go to Eagle's Nest. Look at their planned departure time. 8 a.m. Their estimated return was 2 p.m. Eagle's Nest is an 8-hour hike minimum, even for experienced hikers. They were planning something much shorter. She pulled out her own waterproof map case and spread a detailed geological survey map beside the tactical display. Here's what really happened. They took the main trail for about 2 miles, got to this junction here, and saw the sign for Cascade Falls viewpoint. It's marked as an easy 1.5-mile detour on the tourist maps, but those maps don't show the reality of the terrain. Jake leaned closer, following her finger as she traced the route. The trail to Cascade Falls splits again after half a mile. The left fork goes to the actual falls, but it's steep and technical. The right fork looks easier and is marked with old blazes that most people assume are official trail markers. But those blazes were put there by hunters decades ago, and they lead into the Deadfall Canyon system. You think they took the wrong fork? I know they did. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Jake a series of photos she'd taken during her hikes. I've documented every misleading trail marker in this area. Look at this one. It's positioned right where panicked or tired hikers would naturally turn to avoid a difficult climb. The blazes are faded but still visible enough to follow. The problem is, once you're in Deadfall Canyon, every path looks like it's leading back towards civilization, but they're actually taking you deeper into the wilderness. Jake studied the photos, his expression growing more serious. Sarah, this level of detail ... How long have you been documenting these trails? Every weekend for 3 years. Every day off, every vacation day. I've logged over 1,500 miles of hiking in this forest system, and I've cataloged every dangerous intersection, every misleading marker, every potential hazard that could trap inexperienced hikers. Sarah's voice carried an edge of frustration. I've submitted detailed reports to Morrison about these trail hazards 17 times. The same number of times I've applied for ranger positions. The radio crackled, and Thompson's voice came through. Weekly. Base, this is Thompson. I'm back at the parking area, but I can't raise Morrison or his team. The weather's getting worse up there, and I'm seeing signs that the access roads might start washing out soon. Sarah grabbed the microphone. Before Jake could respond, Thompson, this is Martinez. What's your assessment of the upper trail conditions? Martinez, what are you doing on the radio? Where's the headquarters communication? I'm establishing the forward command post. What are the trail conditions above the 3-mile marker? There was a pause, then Thompson's voice came back more serious. Visibility is near zero above 4,000 feet. The main trail is becoming a creek bed, and I saw at least 2 spots where the shoulder has washed out completely. If Morrison's team is still up there, they're in serious danger. Sarah made a quick decision. Thompson, I need you to coordinate with the volunteer teams and establish a safety perimeter at the 2-mile marker. Nobody else goes up the main trail until conditions improve. Who authorized you to give operational commands? Sarah looked at Jake, who was staring at her with a mixture of surprise and growing respect. I'm authorizing it, Jake said into the radio. Martinez has critical information about alternative routes that could help us locate both the missing family and Morrison's team. Sarah was already packing emergency supplies into her backpack. Jake, I need you to maintain communication protocols and coordinate with county emergency services. I'm going after the Hendrickson family. Absolutely not. You're not trained for search and rescue operations in these conditions. Sarah stopped packing and turned to face him directly. I'm probably the only person within 50 miles who can navigate the Deadfall Canyon system in zero visibility. I know every landmark, every safe shelter point, and every exit route. More importantly, I know exactly where a scared family would try to take shelter, and I know which of those shelters will become death traps when the creek system floods. She pulled out a laminated card from her wallet and handed it to Jake. Wilderness First Aid Certification, updated last month. Technical Rope Rescue Certification from the Mountain Rescue Association. Swift Water Rescue Training from the Pacific Northwest Search and Rescue Organization. I've been preparing for this for 3 years. Jake, the only difference between me and Morrison's team is that they wear official badges and I answer phones. Jake studied the certifications, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. Sarah, why didn't you ever mention any of this? I did. In every ranger application, every performance review, every conversation about field assignments. But apparently, having advanced wilderness training doesn't matter if you're the woman who sits behind the reception desk. The trailer shook as a particularly strong gust of wind hit, and the lights flickered momentarily. Sarah secured her equipment and checked her GPS devices one final time. I'm taking the service road to the Deadfall Canyon access point. It's a route the official search teams don't know about, because it's not marked on standard Forest Service maps. If the Hendrickson family followed the hunters' blazes like I think they did, they'll be trapped in the canyon system somewhere between Miller Creek and the old mining camp. That's got to be at least 6 miles of rough terrain in conditions like this. 7.3 miles with an elevation change of about 1,800 feet. I can cover it in under 3 hours if I maintain a steady pace. Sarah shouldered her pack and headed for the door. The real problem isn't the distance, it's time. The Weather Service updated their forecast 20 minutes ago. This storm system is intensifying faster than predicted, and the creek levels are rising rapidly. If I don't reach them before the main surge hits, the entire canyon floor could be underwater. Jake grabbed her arm as she reached for the door handle. Sarah, if something happens to you out there, Morrison will have my head. Hell, he'll probably fire both of us. Sarah smiled grimly. Jake, I've been fired 17 times in spirit every time they rejected my ranger applications. The only difference now is that it might be official. She opened the door, and the sound of the storm immediately filled the trailer. Keep trying. To raise Morrison on the radio. If you re-establish contact, tell him I'm approaching from the Northwest Canyon access. He'll know what that means. Will he? Probably not. But maybe after tonight, he'll start paying attention when I talk about trail conditions and emergency procedures. Sarah stepped out into the storm and made her way to her vehicle. The service road to Deadfall Canyon access was barely more than a logging track, unmarked and unmaintained, but she'd driven it dozens of times during her off-duty explorations. Her all-wheel drive system engaged automatically as the road surface changed from gravel to mud, and she navigated by memory and the faint outline of familiar trees in her headlights. 25 minutes later, she reached the end of the drivable road and parked beside a rusted gate that blocked vehicle access to the canyon system. The wind was even stronger here, channeled by the narrow canyon walls into a constant roar that made normal hearing impossible. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, checked her GPS coordinates one final time, and started hiking into terrain that would challenge even experienced mountaineers in good weather. The Hunter's Trail was exactly where she expected to find it. A faint path marked by old blazes that were barely visible even with her high-powered headlamp. But Sarah had walked this route so many times that she could navigate by feel, by the subtle changes in terrain and vegetation, that indicated direction and elevation. Each step took her deeper into a landscape that became more treacherous as the storm intensified. After an hour of steady climbing, she found the first evidence that she was on the right track. A candy bar wrapper wedged between two rocks, still relatively fresh despite the rain. Sarah examined it with her headlamp and recognized the brand, one of the high-energy bars that teenage hikers typically carried. She was definitely following the right path. The terrain became more challenging as she entered the heart of the canyon system. The trail crossed Miller Creek 3 times, and Sarah could see that the water level had risen dramatically since her last visit. What had been simple rock-hopping crossings were now rushing torrents that required careful route finding and sure footing on slippery stones. At the second creek crossing, she found more evidence: a torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush, and fresh scuff marks on the rocks where someone had slipped and scrambled for purchase. The fabric was bright blue synthetic material, consistent with modern hiking gear. The Hendrickson family had definitely come this way, and they were struggling with the conditions. Sarah paused to send a GPS coordinate update to her emergency beacon and tried her radio. As expected, she was in a communication dead zone, but the beacon would continue transmitting her location to emergency services. If something happened to her, at least search teams would know where to start looking. The trail climbed steadily toward the old mining camp, a collection of abandoned structures that had been used sporadically by hunters and hikers as emergency shelter for decades. Sarah knew the buildings well. She documented their condition and structural integrity during her weekend explorations. Most were unsafe, with rotted floors and unstable roofs, but there was one stone foundation building that provided solid shelter from severe weather. As she approached the camp, Sarah's headlamp caught something that made her heart race. Fresh footprints in the mud, protected from the rain by an overhanging rock formation. 4 sets of prints, 2 adult, 2 smaller. The stride patterns and depth indicated tired, cautious movement. The Hendrickson family had reached the mining camp, probably within the last few hours. Sarah quickened her pace, following the footprints through the cluster of abandoned buildings. Most showed no signs of recent occupation, but as she approached the stone foundation structure, she saw a faint glow through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Someone had managed to get inside and start some kind of light source. She approached carefully, not wanting to startle potentially panicked people in an already dangerous situation. "Hello, this is Sarah Martinez with the Forest Service. Is anyone there?" A woman's voice responded immediately, filled with relief and desperation. "Oh, thank God, yes, we're here. Please help us. My husband is hurt, and we can't find our way out." Sarah moved to the door and called through the heavy wooden barrier. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need to know your condition first. How many people are with you, and what kind of injuries are we dealing with?" "There are 4 of us. Me, my husband David, and our 2 kids. David fell about 2 hours ago and hurt his leg badly. He can't put weight on it, and we've been lost since yesterday morning. We thought we were taking a short hike to some waterfalls, but everything looked the same, and we kept getting more lost." Sarah quickly assessed the situation. 1 injured adult who couldn't walk, in deteriorating weather conditions, with creek levels rising and the most dangerous part of the storm system still approaching. Getting them out would require technical rescue skills, medical stabilization, and perfect knowledge of alternative routes that could accommodate someone who couldn't use both legs. Fortunately, she had all 3. Sarah quickly examined the door to the stone building, noting the heavy wooden planks that had been nailed across the entrance years ago. The structure was solid, built by miners in the 1940s who understood mountain weather and the need for substantial shelter. Someone had managed to pry loose one of the boards enough to squeeze through, leaving just enough gap for her to assess the interior situation. "Mrs. Hendrickson, I'm going to need to widen this opening to get inside and evaluate your husband's injuries. Can you move everyone away from the door area?" Yes, we're all in the back corner where it's warmest. David made a small fire with some old wood scraps he found. Sarah pulled her multi-tool from her pack and began working on the nails holding the loose board. The metal was rusted but still solid, requiring careful leverage to avoid damaging the door frame or injuring herself with flying debris. As she worked, she kept talking to keep the family calm and gather critical information. How long has it been since David injured his leg? About 3 hours ago, maybe 4. We were trying to find our way back to the main trail, and he slipped on some wet rocks crossing a creek. He said he heard something pop, and he couldn't stand up afterward. Sarah grimaced. A popping sound during a fall usually indicated either a serious ligament tear or a fracture. Either way, moving him would require careful medical assessment and proper stabilization. She finally freed the board enough to create an opening wide enough for her pack and shoulders. The interior of the building was actually warmer and drier than she'd expected. David Hendrickson had done an impressive job creating a shelter situation from available materials. He'd built a small controlled fire in what had once been a fireplace, using dry wood from broken furniture left behind by previous occupants. The family had arranged their backpacks and extra clothing to create insulation from the stone floor, and they'd even managed to collect rainwater in their empty bottles. Mr. Hendrickson, I'm Sarah Martinez with the Forest Service. You've done excellent work making this place habitable. That may have saved your family's lives. David looked up from where he was sitting with his injured leg elevated on a makeshift cushion of clothing. He was pale and obviously in pain, but alert and coherent. Thank you for finding us. I was starting to worry we'd made some seriously bad decisions out there. Sarah knelt beside him and began her medical assessment. Actually, your decision to take shelter here was exactly right. This is one of the few truly safe buildings in the entire canyon system. Most of the other structures would have collapsed. In winds like this, she gently examined his injured leg through his torn hiking pants. I need to check your ankle and lower leg. This might be uncomfortable. As she conducted her examination, Sarah mentally cataloged the injury details. Significant swelling around the ankle joint, probable fracture of the fibula based on the deformity pattern, and restricted range of motion consistent with ligament damage. David would definitely need medical evacuation, but she could stabilize the injury enough for transport. Emma, Michael, Sarah addressed the 2 teenagers who were huddled together near the fire. I need you both to help me with some tasks. Emma, you look like you're the organized one, am I right? The 16-year-old girl nodded, managing a weak smile despite her obvious fear. I usually handle the planning when we go hiking. I'm the one who researches trails and checks weather reports. Perfect. I need you to help me organize our evacuation supplies. Michael, you're going to assist me with creating a stretcher system for your dad. Have either of you ever done any first aid training? I took a babysitting course last summer that included basic first aid, Emma replied. And Michael is in Boy Scouts, so he knows some camping skills. Sarah smiled reassuringly while she worked. Excellent. You're both going to be crucial members of our rescue team. She began pulling medical supplies from her pack. Mrs. Hendrickson, what's your first name? Jennifer, and please call me Jeanne. Jeanne, I need you to help me stabilize David's leg while I apply a splint. This is going to hurt initially, but it will make moving him much safer and actually reduce his pain during transport. As Sarah worked to immobilize David's injured leg, she explained her evacuation plan. The good news is that I know 3 different routes out of this canyon system, and one of them is accessible even with someone who can't walk. The challenging news is that we need to move quickly because the creek system is rising, and the route. I'm planning to use crosses several water obstacles that will become impassable if we wait too long. She secured the final straps on David's improvised splint and sat back to check her work. David, how does that feel? Much better, actually. The pain is more manageable when it's not moving around. Good. The splint should hold for the evacuation, but you'll need proper medical treatment as soon as we get you to a hospital. Sarah began organizing her equipment for the transport phase. Now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create a rescue sled using materials I brought and some items from this building. Emma and Michael, you're going to help me navigate while John assists with the sled management. Sarah pulled out a lightweight emergency tarp, several lengths of climbing rope, and a collapsible aluminum frame from her pack. This is a wilderness rescue sled system. It's designed to allow one person to transport an injured hiker across rough terrain. As she assembled the device, Michael watched with fascination. How did you know to bring all this equipment? I've been preparing for situations exactly like this for years. Most people think wilderness rescue is just about knowing the trails, but it's really about having the right equipment and training to handle medical emergencies in remote locations. The sled came together quickly, a flexible platform that could be pulled behind her while distributing David's weight across a wide surface area. She tested the attachment points and adjusted the harness system that would allow her to pull the load while maintaining her balance and mobility. Before we leave, I need everyone to understand the route we're taking and what to expect. Sarah spread out her waterproof map and indicated their current location and destination. We're here at the old mining camp. The normal route back to the parking area is blocked by flooding, but there's an alternative path that follows the ridgeline before dropping down to connect with the service road I used to access this area. She traced the route with her finger. The total distance is about 4 miles, but it includes some technical sections where we'll need to work as a team. There are 3 creek crossings, 2 steep descent areas that will require careful rope work, and 1 section where we'll be exposed to weather for about half a mile. Jennifer looked concerned. Is it safe to travel in conditions like this? It's safer than staying here, Sarah replied honestly. The weather forecast shows this storm intensifying over the next 6 hours. The creek that runs behind this building is going to rise another 3 to 4 feet, which means this entire area could be flooded by morning. We have a window of opportunity right now to get out before conditions become impossible. Sarah helped David onto the rescue sled and secured him with the safety harnesses. David, your job is to stay as still as possible and let us know immediately if you experience any problems with circulation or breathing. Emma, you're going to be my navigator. I'll give you a compass and GPS unit, and you'll help me confirm our position at regular intervals. What about me? Michael asked. You're our safety officer. You'll be watching for hazards like loose rocks, changing weather conditions, or any problems with the sled system. If you see anything dangerous, you call out immediately, and we all stop until we address the issue. Sarah distributed emergency supplies among the family members, additional flashlights, emergency food, extra batteries, and waterproof clothing. Everyone needs to stay hydrated and maintain body temperature. The physical exertion will keep us warm, but we can't afford to have anyone become hypothermic during the evacuation. She secured her own pack, clipped into the sled harness, and tested the weight distribution. David was probably around 180 pounds, and the sled added another 15 pounds. But the mechanical advantage of the system made it manageable even over rough terrain. Before we head out, does anyone have questions about the plan or concerns about their ability to handle the physical demands? Emma raised her hand tentatively. What if we encounter other problems along the way? Like if someone else gets hurt, or if the weather gets worse? Sarah appreciated the thoughtful question. I have contingency plans for various scenarios, including emergency shelter locations where we can wait for conditions to improve. I also have communication equipment that will work once we reach higher elevation. The most important thing is that we stay together as a team and communicate constantly about how everyone is feeling. She moved to the door and peered out into the storm. The wind had shifted direction slightly, and the rain seemed to be coming. in waves rather than the steady downpour they'd experienced earlier. The weather appears to be in a temporary lull phase. This is our best opportunity to move. Sarah led the family out of the building and into the storm. The sled performed well on the rough ground around the mining camp, and David reported that the ride was uncomfortable but tolerable. They made good progress for the first half-mile, following a relatively well-defined path that Sarah had marked during her previous explorations. The first real challenge came at Miller Creek, which had transformed from a manageable stream into a rushing torrent of muddy water carrying debris from higher elevations. Sarah stopped the group about 50 yards from the crossing point and conducted a detailed assessment of the water conditions. "The water level is higher than I expected, but it's still within manageable limits," she announced. "However, we're going to need to use technical rope systems to ensure everyone's safety during the crossing." Sarah anchored a climbing rope to a solid tree on their side of the creek, then waded across the rushing water to establish an anchor point on the opposite bank. The current was strong enough to knock her off balance, but her experience with swift water rescue techniques allowed her to maintain her footing and complete the rope system. "Emma, you're going first. Clip into this harness and follow the rope across. Don't try to fight the current. Let it push you downstream slightly, but keep moving toward the anchor point." Emma successfully crossed the creek, followed by Michael and then Jennifer. The sled crossing required more complex maneuvering, with Sarah guiding it through the water while Jennifer helped control it from the opposite bank. David remained calm throughout the process, even when rushing water splashed across the sled platform. Once everyone was safely across, Sarah coiled the rope and resumed their journey. The next section of trail climbed steadily through dense forest, providing some protection from the wind, but creating new challenges with slippery footing and low-hanging branches that threatened to snag the sled. 2 hours into their evacuation, they reached the ridgeline section where they would be exposed to the full force of the storm. Sarah called a rest break and distributed energy bars and water while she assessed everyone's condition. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then looked at the ambulance where David was receiving professional medical care, at the family members who were clearly grateful and safe, and at the emergency responders who were documenting the successful rescue operation. "Martinez, in my 23 years with the Forest Service, I've seen a lot of search and rescue operations. Most of them involve multiple teams, extensive coordination, and several hours of preparation before anyone enters the field." He paused, and Sarah detected what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Very few of them achieve the kind of results you accomplished tonight with a solo operation." Ranger Davis stepped forward, looking somewhat sheepish. "Captain, I owe Martinez an apology. When she tried to brief us about the canyon routes and communication dead zones this morning, I dismissed her input. If we'd listened to her suggestions, we might not have spent 6 hours lost in the weather ourselves." Morrison nodded slowly. "Davis, that's exactly the kind of attitude adjustment this entire unit needs to make." He turned back to Sarah. "Martinez, tomorrow morning you and I are going to have a detailed conversation about your qualifications, your training certifications, and your knowledge of this forest system. I have a feeling we've been significantly underutilizing your capabilities." "Jake." Williamson joined the conversation, carrying a folder of paperwork. "Captain, I've been reviewing Sarah's personnel file while coordinating the emergency response. Did you know she has more advanced wilderness training than anyone currently on our ranger staff? Technical rescue, wilderness medicine, swift water rescue, even helicopter operations coordination." "I was not aware of that level of training," Morrison admitted. "Martinez, why wasn't this information included in your ranger position applications?" Sarah felt a familiar frustration rising, but she kept her voice professional. "Sir, it was included in every application. Detailed certifications, training transcripts, and references from instructors. The rejection letters always cited lack of field experience as the primary reason for non-selection. Morrison was quiet for several moments, processing this information while emergency responders continued their work around them. Finally, he spoke again. "Martinez, how many Ranger positions have you applied for since joining our unit?" 17 applications over 3 years, sir." "And how many times have you submitted reports about trail hazards, communication dead zones, and safety concerns in the areas we searched unsuccessfully today?" Sarah hesitated, unsure whether honesty would help or hurt her situation. 17 reports, sir. Usually submitted the same week as my Ranger applications." Morrison closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, his expression had changed completely. "Martinez, I owe you an apology that's about 3 years overdue. I also owe this unit a serious review of our hiring practices and our willingness to listen to input from all staff members, regardless of their current job titles." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a white SUV with government plates. District Supervisor Patricia Hawkins emerged from the vehicle, accompanied by 2 people Sarah didn't recognize. Hawkins surveyed the scene, the successful rescue operation, the grateful family, the emergency responders, and the assembled Forest Service personnel. "Captain Morrison, I need a full briefing on tonight's events. I understand we had multiple teams lost in severe weather, a missing family, and an unauthorized solo rescue operation." Hawkins' tone was neutral, but suggested that someone was going to be answering difficult questions. Morrison straightened. "Supervisor Hawkins, tonight's events revealed some significant gaps in our operational procedures and personnel management. However, they also demonstrated exceptional performance by one of our staff members who deserves recognition rather than discipline." He gestured toward Sarah. "Administrative Coordinator Martinez successfully located and evacuated a family of 4, including 1 member with serious injuries, using advanced technical rescue skills and detailed knowledge of terrain that proved inaccessible to our standard search teams. Her actions likely prevented multiple fatalities." Hawkins studied Sarah with new interest. "Martinez, what's your background and training for this type of operation?" Sarah provided a concise summary of her education, certifications, and experience, while Hawkins took notes and asked detailed follow-up questions. As the conversation progressed, Sarah noticed the supervisor's expression shifting from skepticism to interest to what appeared to be professional excitement. "Martinez, how would you feel about transferring to our regional emergency response team? We're expanding the program and looking for personnel with exactly your combination of technical skills and local terrain knowledge." Sarah felt her heart racing. "I would be very interested in that opportunity, ma'am. The position comes with a significant increase in responsibility, specialized equipment, and coordination with multiple agencies. It also comes with a badge, field authority, and a salary increase of about 30% over your current position." Before Sarah could respond, Jennifer Hendrickson approached the group. "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure you all understand what this woman accomplished tonight. She didn't just rescue us, she made us feel like we were part of a professional rescue team. Her knowledge, her equipment, her leadership under pressure, it was extraordinary." David called out from the ambulance. "The EMTs tell me that Sarah's medical treatment and stabilization probably prevented permanent damage to my leg. Her splinting technique was textbook perfect, and her evacuation methods were better than anything I've seen in civilian rescue operations." Supervisor Hawkins smiled. "Well, Martinez, it sounds like you've made quite an impression tonight. Captain Morrison, I want a detailed report on our personnel evaluation procedures and how someone with Martinez's qualifications ended up answering phones instead of leading rescue operations." As the emergency vehicles began departing and the family was transported to medical care, Sarah found herself standing in the storm that had seemed so threatening hours earlier. Now it felt like a cleansing rain, washing away years of frustration and unrecognized potential. Jake approached her as she loaded her equipment back into her vehicle. "Sarah, I have to ask, how does it feel to go from receptionist to regional rescue specialist in one night?" Sarah smiled as she secured her rescue gear. "Jake, I was never just a receptionist. Tonight, everyone else finally figured that out." As she drove back toward headquarters through the diminishing storm, Sarah reflected on the dramatic changes that a single night had brought to her career and her life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to use her skills in ways she'd dreamed about for years. But tonight, she had saved 4 lives and proven that expertise and dedication matter more than job titles or other people's assumptions. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. 3 weeks after the rescue operation, Sarah stood in front of the Regional Forest Service headquarters in Portland, adjusting her new uniform and checking her equipment. One final time. The building was significantly larger than the small station, where she'd spent 3 years filing reports and answering phones, with multiple floors dedicated to specialized operations, including the emergency response team she was about to join. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a different person than the one who had sat behind a reception desk just a month earlier. The standard administrative coordinator uniform had been replaced with tactical gear, specialized boots, and a utility belt that carried emergency communication equipment, medical supplies, and technical rescue tools. More importantly, the badge on her chest read Emergency Response Specialist rather than the generic Forest Service identification she'd worn for years. Inside the building, Sarah navigated through corridors filled with personnel who moved with the purposeful energy of people engaged in meaningful work. Maps covered the walls showing forest systems across 3 states, marked with pins indicating current operations, seasonal hazards, and resource allocations. This was the level of forest management she'd always wanted to be part of, strategic, important, and requiring the kind of expertise she'd been developing for years. "Martinez?" A woman's voice called from behind her. Sarah turned to see Deputy Regional Director Linda Chun approaching with a clipboard and what appeared to be a substantial briefing packet. "I'm Chun, your new supervisor. Welcome to the emergency response team. Ready for your first day of advanced training?" "Absolutely, ma'am. I'm looking forward to learning the regional protocols and procedures." Chun smiled as she handed Sarah the briefing materials. "Actually, you're going to be doing more than learning protocols. Based on your performance during the Hendrickson rescue, we're fast-tracking you through standard orientation and moving directly to specialized assignments. Your first project is developing new search and rescue procedures for the Cascade Mountain region." Sarah opened the folder and immediately recognized aerial photographs of the terrain where she'd conducted her rescue operation. But these photos showed a much larger area, encompassing dozens of trail systems, multiple watersheds, and terrain features that would challenge even experienced rescue teams. "The Hendrickson incident revealed some significant gaps in our current procedures," Chun explained as they walked toward the briefing room. "Multiple teams got lost, communication systems failed, and our standard search patterns missed the actual location of the missing family. Your knowledge of alternative routes and your understanding of how lost hikers actually behave in emergency situations could help us redesign our entire approach." They entered a conference room where several other emergency response team members were already assembled. Sarah recognized the professional atmosphere immediately. These were people who took their work seriously and expected everyone around them to perform at the highest level. "Everyone, this is Sarah Martinez, the specialist who conducted the successful solo rescue operation in the Deadfall Canyon system 3 weeks ago. She'll be leading our review of current search protocols and helping us develop new training standards." Chun gestured for Sarah to take a seat at the conference table. "Sarah, why don't you start by walking us through your decision-making process during the rescue?" For the next hour, Sarah found herself explaining her analysis of the Hendrickson family's likely route, her assessment of weather conditions and terrain hazards, and her selection of evacuation procedures. But unlike her previous experiences explaining her expertise to Morrison and his team, these professionals asked detailed technical questions and took extensive notes. "Your point about following water sources is particularly interesting," commented Operations Specialist Robert Kim. "Our current training emphasizes staying on marked trails, but you're suggesting that lost hikers instinctively follow terrain features that lead them away from official routes." Exactly. People in panic situations don't think logically about trail systems or navigation. They follow what appears to be the path of least resistance, which often means following water downstream or taking what looks like an easier route. The problem is that those natural choices can lead them into extremely dangerous situations. Sarah pulled out her own topographical maps, which were covered with detailed annotations in different colored inks. "I've documented 17 different locations in the Cascade system where official trail markers are misleading or where natural terrain features create dangerous decision points for inexperienced hikers. Most of these locations aren't addressed in our current search protocols." Training. Coordinator Maria Santos leaned forward to examine Sarah's maps. "This level of detail is extraordinary. How long did it take you to compile this information?" 3 years of weekend fieldwork, plus analysis of every missing hiker report filed in our district during that period. I cross-referenced the locations where people got lost with the routes they were officially supposed to follow, looking for patterns in decision-making under stress. Chun exchanged glances with other team members. "Sarah, this represents exactly the kind of analytical approach we need for developing new procedures. How would you feel about expanding this analysis to cover the entire 3-state region?" Sarah felt a surge of excitement that she tried to keep professional. "I would be very interested in that project. I think we could significantly improve rescue success rates by understanding the psychology of lost hikers and the terrain features that influence their decision-making." "Excellent. Your first assignment will be to conduct field assessments of high-risk areas in Oregon and Washington, documenting potential hazards and developing new search strategies. You'll be working with a team of experienced specialists, but you'll be the lead analyst for terrain psychology and alternative route identification." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from advanced communication protocols to helicopter coordination procedures. Sarah found herself contributing to discussions about equipment standards, training requirements, and operational procedures with people who valued her input and took her suggestions seriously. After the briefing, Chun walked with Sarah to her new office space, an actual office with windows, computer systems, and wall space for displaying the detailed map she'd been creating for years. "Sarah, I want to be direct about something. Your rescue of the Hendrickson family was impressive, but what really caught our attention was the systematic approach you used to analyze the situation. You didn't just get lucky. You applied years of methodical research to solve a complex problem under pressure." Sarah arranged her materials on her new desk, noting the advanced computer systems and communication equipment that would allow her to coordinate with rescue teams across multiple states. "I've always believed that good rescue work starts with understanding both the terrain and human behavior. Most people focus on one or the other, but emergency situations require both. That's exactly why we created this position for you. The traditional approach to search and rescue has been to train people to be physically capable and technically proficient. But we've realized that we also need people who can think strategically about where to search and how to predict victim behavior." Chun handed Sarah a badge case containing her official credentials. "Regional Emergency Response Specialist Martinez, your authority extends across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. You'll be coordinating with local ranger stations, sheriff departments, and volunteer search teams. When there's a missing person case in difficult terrain, You're going to be the expert they call for strategic guidance. That afternoon, Sarah attended her first regional coordination meeting, conducted via video conference with emergency response supervisors from across the three-state area. She found herself briefing law enforcement officials, fire department, commanders, and experienced rescue coordinators about terrain analysis and search strategy. "Martinez, we've reviewed your documentation of the Deadfall Canyon rescue," said Sheriff Roberts from Clackamas County. "Your prediction of the family's route was based on psychological factors we'd never considered. How would you apply similar analysis to other missing person cases?" Sarah shared her screen to display a detailed terrain analysis she'd prepared. "Every geographical area has what I call decision pressure points, locations where people under stress are likely to make choices that take them away from safety. By mapping these points and understanding the psychological factors that influence decision-making, we can develop search patterns that focus on high-probability areas rather than just systematic grid searches." The questions that followed were detailed and technical, covering everything from weather impact on decision-making to the influence of group dynamics on navigation choices. Sarah found herself drawing on her years of research and field observation to provide answers that clearly impressed the experienced professionals on the call. After the meeting, Sarah received a text message that made her smile. It was from Jennifer Hendrickson. "Saw the news article about your promotion. The kids and I are so proud of you. David is walking normally again, and we're planning another hiking trip with much better preparation this time. Thank you for showing us what real expertise looks like." The news article Jennifer referenced was sitting on Sarah's desk, a feature story in the regional newspaper titled, "From Receptionist to Regional Rescue Expert, How One Woman's Dedication Changed Emergency Response." The article included quotes from Captain Morrison acknowledging the mistakes in his personnel evaluation and praising Sarah's contributions to improved rescue procedures. But more satisfying than the media attention was the stack of consultation requests already accumulating on her desk. Police departments wanted her input on missing person cases. Other Forest Service regions were requesting copies of her terrain analysis methods. Professional rescue organizations were asking her to speak at conferences about psychological factors. In wilderness emergencies, Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her review of the consultation requests. The caller ID showed Cascade National Forest Headquarters, her old workplace. "Martinez, this is Morrison. I hope you have a few minutes to talk." "Of course, Captain. How can I help you?" "Actually, I'm calling to ask for your assistance with a situation we're facing. We have a missing rock climber in the Devil's Backbone area, and our initial search efforts aren't producing results. I was hoping you might be willing to provide some strategic guidance." Sarah pulled up her detailed maps of the Devil's Backbone climbing area, remembering the countless hours she'd spent documenting the complex route systems and potential hazard zones. "What do you know about the climber's experience level and intended route?" Morrison provided the available information while Sarah analyzed the terrain features and likely decision points. Within 20 minutes, she'd identified 3 high-probability search areas that hadn't been covered by the initial rescue efforts. "Martinez, your analysis makes complete sense. We've been searching the official climbing routes, but you're right that an inexperienced climber would probably follow what appears to be easier terrain." Morrison paused before continuing. "I want you to know that I've implemented new procedures for evaluating personnel, qualifications, and listening to input from all team members, regardless of their current positions." "I appreciate that, Captain, and I'm always available to assist. With complex search situations, that's what this job is about." After ending the call, Sarah stood at her office window looking out at the forest-covered mountains that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, people would face emergencies that required the kind of expertise she'd spent years developing. The difference was that now she had the authority, resources, and professional respect necessary to help them effectively. Her computer chimed with an incoming email, marked priority, urgent. The message was from Chun, forwarding a request from the Washington State Emergency Management Division. A family of 5 had disappeared during a backcountry camping trip in the Olympic National Forest, and local search teams were requesting immediate consultation from a terrain psychology specialist. Sarah grabbed her emergency response pack and headed for the door. 3 weeks ago, she'd been filing incident reports and answering phones while watching other people respond to emergencies. Today, she was the expert they called when lives hung in the balance. As she walked toward her official Forest Service vehicle, equipped with advanced communication systems, emergency medical supplies, and technical rescue equipment, Sarah reflected on how completely her professional life had transformed. But the most important change wasn't in her title or her salary or her recognition from colleagues. The most important change was that she finally had the opportunity to use her expertise to save lives on a scale that could make a real difference in wilderness safety across multiple states. And that opportunity had started with a single decision to stop waiting for permission and start taking action. 6 months after her promotion, Sarah found herself standing on a windswept ridge overlooking the Olympic National Forest, coordinating the largest multi-agency search operation in Washington state history. Below her, teams from 7 different counties worked in carefully orchestrated patterns across a terrain so challenging that previous rescue attempts had been abandoned as too dangerous. Martinez were getting conflicting GPS readings from Team Delta, crackled the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes from the National Guard helicopter circling overhead. They're reporting position coordinates that don't match their visual descriptions of the terrain. Sarah consulted her tablet, which displayed real-time tracking data from all 12 ground teams, weather monitoring stations, and aerial reconnaissance units. The technology was a far cry from the basic radio equipment she'd used during the Hendrickson rescue, but the fundamental challenge remained the same: understanding how the landscape affected both the missing people and the searchers trying to find them. Colonel Hayes, Team Delta is experiencing magnetic deviation from the iron ore deposits in that sector. Have them switch to visual navigation using the ridgeline formation I briefed this morning. Their current position should show 3 distinct granite outcroppings forming a triangle pattern. Copy that, Martinez, switching to visual confirmation. The missing family this time was different from the Hendricksons. The Patel family from Seattle consisted of experienced hikers who had been attempting a challenging 5-day backcountry loop when an unexpected late-season blizzard had trapped them somewhere in the vast wilderness. Dr. Rayesh Patel was a cardiologist. His wife Priya was a software architect, and their twin daughters Kavya and Mira were both accomplished athletes and outdoor enthusiasts at age 19. What made this case particularly complex was that the family had deliberately chosen an unmarked route that would take them through some of the most remote terrain in the Olympic range. They had the skills and equipment to survive harsh conditions, but they had also ventured into areas where standard search techniques were ineffective. Specialist Martinez, this is Base Command, came the voice of Operations Director Patricia Hawkins through Sarah's headset. How's our timeline looking for the northern sector sweep? Sarah checked her analysis of weather patterns, team progress, and probability matrices she'd developed for this specific operation. Base Command, we're ahead of schedule in Sectors 3 and 5, but I'm concerned about the deteriorating conditions in Sector 7. The snow accumulation is creating avalanche risk that wasn't in the original forecast. Do you recommend pulling teams out of that area? Sarah studied the topographical data on her tablet, cross-referencing it with meteorological reports and her own knowledge of how experienced hikers would respond to changing weather conditions. Negative, Base Command. If the Patel family is in Sector 7, they would have sought shelter in the cave systems near Glacier Creek. Those caves provide excellent protection from avalanches, but they also create communication dead zones that could prevent the family from signaling rescue teams. Understood. What's your recommendation for search modification? I'm requesting permission to take a technical team into Sector 7 using the advanced climbing route that approaches the cave systems from below. It's a more dangerous approach for searchers, but it's also the only way to access those areas before weather conditions make them completely inaccessible. There was a pause before Hawkins responded. Martinez, that route has never been attempted during winter conditions. Are you certain it's worth the risk? Sarah had spent weeks analyzing the Patel family's hiking patterns, their equipment list, and their documented experience with winter camping. Every piece of evidence pointed to them making sophisticated survival decisions that would take them to locations where standard search techniques couldn't reach them. Base Command, I'm certain that's where they are, Dr. Patel posted detailed route plans on hiking forums before the trip. He specifically mentioned wanting to explore the hidden cave systems that most hikers never discover. The Glacier Creek Caves are the only formations in this area that match that description. Very well. You have authorization for the technical approach. Take teams Alpha and Charlie and maintain constant communication with Base Command. Sarah gathered her specialized equipment and moved toward the staging area where the technical rescue teams were preparing their gear. These were the most experienced mountain rescue specialists in the Pacific Northwest, people whose skills had been proven in dozens of dangerous operations. Team leader Marcus Webb looked up as Sarah approached. Martinez, I've been studying the route you're proposing. The approach angle is going to require some serious technical climbing, especially with current ice conditions. Are you prepared for that level of difficulty? Sarah shouldered her pack, which contained advanced climbing gear, winter survival equipment, and enough supplies for a multi-day operation if necessary. Webb, I've climbed this route twice during summer conditions and once during a winter training exercise. The key challenges are the ice falls at the halfway point and the traverse section, where the rock face is exposed to wind loading. Webb's expression showed surprise. You've climbed this route before? It's not marked on any of the official climbing guides. I've been documenting unmapped routes throughout this region for years. The Glacier Creek approach is actually more stable than the standard routes during winter conditions because it's protected from the prevailing wind patterns that create the most dangerous ice formations. As the three-person technical team prepared to depart, Sarah reviewed the approach strategy one final time. The route would take them up a nearly vertical rock face for about 800 feet, across a narrow ledge system that required advanced traversing skills, and then down into the cave complex where she believed the Patel family had taken shelter. Martinez, before we start this climb, I need to ask about your technical qualifications, said team member Sandra Liu, checking her climbing harness and protection gear. This isn't the kind of route where we can afford to have someone who's not completely qualified. Sarah handed Liu her certification cards: Technical Rescue Instructor Level, Advanced Alpine Climbing Guide, Ice Climbing Specialist, and Wilderness Emergency Medical Technician. I've been leading climbing expeditions in the Cascades and Olympics for over 4 years. I'm probably more familiar with this specific terrain than anyone currently working in rescue operations. Liu studied the certifications and nodded approvingly. These are serious credentials. Why didn't anyone know about your climbing background when you were working as an administrative coordinator? Because no one ever asked. Everyone saw the job title and assumed that defined my capabilities. The climb began in deteriorating weather conditions, with wind gusts strong enough to affect balance, and ice formation that changed the character of the rock face significantly. Sarah led the ascent, choosing routes and placing protection with the confidence that came from intimate knowledge of the terrain. Martinez, your route selection is perfect, Webb called from below as they reached the halfway point. These protection placements are textbook quality, and you're finding holds that I wouldn't have seen without studying this wall for hours. The traverse section required the most technical skill, with the team moving horizontally across a rock, face while managing ropes and equipment in conditions that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. Sarah had practiced this exact traverse during her weekend climbing trips, but never with the additional pressure of conducting a rescue operation in deteriorating weather. "Liu, watch the ice loading on that overhang," Sarah called as they approached the most difficult section. The accumulation pattern suggests that the section could be released without warning. 2 hours after beginning the climb, the team reached the entrance to the cave system. Sarah immediately noticed signs of recent human presence, scuff marks. On the rocks, a piece of bright fabric caught on a sharp edge, and the unmistakable pattern of boot prints in protected snow. "Base Command, this is Martinez. We've reached the cave entrance, and we have clear evidence of recent human activity. Proceeding into the cave system to locate the missing family." "Copy, Martinez. Be advised that weather conditions are continuing to deteriorate. You may have limited time for extraction if conditions worsen." The cave system was more extensive than Sarah had expected, with multiple chambers and connecting passages that required careful navigation to avoid getting lost. But her headlamp quickly revealed more signs of occupation: a makeshift fire ring, food packaging, and clothing items spread out to dry. "Hello? This is Mountain Rescue. Is anyone here?" Sarah called into the deeper sections of the cave. "Here! We're here! In the back chamber." The response came immediately, filled with relief and excitement. Sarah followed the voice deeper into the cave system and found the Patel family in a large chamber that they had converted into a remarkably comfortable emergency shelter. Dr. Patel had constructed an efficient heating system using available materials. Priya had organized their supplies to maximize nutrition and warmth, and the twin daughters had created sleeping areas that provided insulation from the stone floor. "Dr. Patel, I'm Sarah Martinez with Regional Emergency Response. How is everyone's condition?" "We're all healthy and in good spirits," Dr. Patel replied. "We've been quite comfortable here, actually, but we realized yesterday that the storm was too severe for us to attempt traveling back to our original route. We were planning to wait for better weather, but we're certainly glad to see rescue teams." Sarah conducted a quick medical assessment of all 4 family members, finding them to be in excellent condition despite 3 days in emergency shelter. "You made exactly the right decisions. This cave system provides better protection than most official emergency shelters, and your survival setup is extremely professional. Thank you. We've done quite a bit of winter camping, so we know how to stay safe in challenging conditions. But we also know when it's time to accept help from people with more experience than we have." The extraction process required careful coordination with the team still on the surface. Sarah established a rope system that would allow the family members to be safely lowered down the technical sections of the route, while Webb and Lou managed the complex anchoring and belay systems required for such an operation. "Martinez, the weather window is closing faster than expected," came Hawkins' voice through the radio. "You need to begin extraction immediately if you're going to get everyone out safely." The descent with the 4 family members was technically challenging but proceeded smoothly, with each person demonstrating the kind of composure and physical capability that made the operation possible. Dr. Patel and his family had prepared themselves mentally and physically for technical rescue, making Sarah's job significantly easier. 2 hours later, the entire group stood safely at the base of the cliff, where additional rescue teams were waiting with emergency medical support and transportation back to civilization. The Patel family was reunited with extended family members who had traveled from Seattle, and the multi-agency search operation was declared a complete success. "Martinez, that was extraordinary work," commented Colonel Hayes as the helicopter prepared to transport the family to medical evaluation. "Your prediction of their location was perfect, and your technical approach was the only way to reach them before weather conditions made extraction impossible." As Sarah packed her equipment and prepared for the journey back to base command, she reflected on how different this operation had been from her first rescue. The Hendrickson case had been about proving herself capable. The Patel case had been about leading a complex operation that required coordination between multiple agencies and management of sophisticated technical challenges. "Sarah," Dr. Patel approached her before boarding the evacuation helicopter. "I wanted to thank you personally. Your decision to attempt the technical route saved us at least 2 more days in the cave, and possibly prevented a much more dangerous situation if the weather had continued to worsen. Dr. Patel, you and your family handled this situation exactly right. Your preparation and decision-making made this rescue possible. We read about your background after we heard your name on the radio. The article about your transition from administrative work to emergency response specialist. It's inspiring to see someone pursue their expertise so persistently." As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the cloudy sky, Sarah found herself standing with Webb and Lou, who were securing equipment and conducting post-operation debriefings. "Martinez, I have to say, when we started this climb, I was skeptical about working with someone who'd been promoted so recently," Webb admitted. "But your technical skills are better than most people I've worked with for years, and your rote knowledge made this operation possible." Lou nodded in agreement. "More importantly, you made decisions under pressure that showed real leadership capability. That's not something you can learn from textbooks." Sarah smiled as she shouldered her pack for the hike back to the command post. 6 months ago, her expertise had been invisible to everyone around her. Today, that same expertise had been essential to saving 4 lives and managing a complex operation involving dozens of professional rescuers. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional recognition or the successful outcome. The most satisfying part was knowing that her years of patient preparation and persistent development of expertise had created the capability to make a real difference when people needed help the most. 1 year later, Sarah stood before an audience of 300 emergency responders at the National Search and Rescue Conference in Denver, preparing to deliver the keynote address on revolutionary approaches to wilderness emergency response. The PowerPoint presentation behind her displayed a map of the Pacific Northwest marked with dozens of successful rescue operations that had utilized her terrain psychology methods. "Ladies and gentlemen, when I started my career in Forest Service administration, I was told that my job was to answer phones and file paperwork. What no one realized was that I was actually conducting a 7-year research project on the intersection of human psychology and wilderness survival." The audience laughed, but Sarah could see the serious attention in their faces. These were professionals who had traveled from across North America to learn about techniques that were already saving lives and revolutionizing search protocols in multiple states. The fundamental assumption underlying traditional search and rescue is that lost people behave rationally. We create search grids based on where people should go, not where they actually go when they're scared, exhausted, and making decisions under extreme stress. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed analysis of successful rescues over the past year. Since implementing psychological terrain analysis in the Pacific Northwest region, our success rate for locating missing persons within the first 24 hours has increased from 62% to 87%. More importantly, our average search time has decreased from 18 hours to 6 hours. A hand went up in the audience. "Specialist Martinez, how do you account for such dramatic improvements in efficiency?" The key insight is understanding that people in survival situations follow predictable psychological patterns that override their logical thinking. When someone realizes they're lost, they don't consult maps or follow official trail markers. They follow terrain features that appear to offer safety, comfort, or the illusion of progress toward civilization. Sarah advanced to a slide showing the original Hendrickson rescue route. This family followed a path that seemed easier and more direct, but actually led them deeper into dangerous terrain. However, their choices were entirely predictable ones. You understand the psychological factors influencing their decision-making. She spent the next 30 minutes detailing the methodology she developed for predicting victim behavior, mapping high-probability search zones, and training rescue teams to think like the people they were trying to find rather than like professional searchers. The practical application of this approach requires extensive field research, detailed terrain mapping, and ongoing analysis of actual rescue cases. But the results speak for themselves. We're finding people faster, with fewer resources, and in conditions where traditional methods have failed. During the question and answer session, Sarah fielded inquiries from rescue coordinators representing agencies across the United States and Canada. Several announced plans to implement her methods in their own regions, and multiple universities expressed interest in developing formal training programs based on her research. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by Dr. Emily Watson from the University of Washington's Emergency Management Program. Ms. Martinez, we've been following your work for months. Would you be interested in developing a graduate-level curriculum in psychological terrain analysis? We believe this could become a new specialization within emergency management education. I'd be very interested in that opportunity. Dr. Watson, one of my goals is to ensure that this knowledge gets incorporated into standard training rather than remaining specialized expertise. As Sarah left the conference center, her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Williamson. Watching your presentation online from the station. Morrison says to tell you that your old reception desk is now a display case showcasing your awards and certifications. We tell every new employee your story as an example of why we listen to everyone's input, regardless of their job title. The message made Sarah smile as she walked through downtown Denver toward her hotel. Her transformation from unrecognized expert to nationally respected specialist had created ripple effects throughout the Forest Service that extended far beyond her own career advancement. That evening, Sarah attended the conference awards banquet, where she was surprised to find herself called to the podium to receive the National Association of Search and Rescue's Innovation in Emergency Response Award. The presenter read a citation describing her contributions to wilderness rescue methodology and her role in improving survival rates across multiple regions. This year's recipient has demonstrated that expertise can emerge from unexpected places, and that the most important qualifications for emergency response work are dedication, knowledge, and the courage to act when lives are at stake. As Sarah accepted the award, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Years of patient preparation, persistent skill development, and the willingness to prove herself when opportunity finally presented itself. But most importantly, the recognition that her true capabilities had always existed. They had simply been invisible to people who couldn't see. Beyond job titles and organizational hierarchies. 2 days later, Sarah returned to her office in Portland to find a stack of consultation requests from emergency management agencies across the country. Police departments in Colorado wanted her input on missing hiker cases. Fire departments in Montana requested training programs for their search teams. The Canadian Park Service was asking about adapting her methods for different terrain and weather conditions. But the most significant item on her desk was a formal offer from the Department of Homeland Security to join their National Emergency Response Coordination Center as Director of Wilderness Search Psychology. The position would involve overseeing search and rescue operations across all federal lands, developing national training standards, and coordinating with international rescue organizations. Sarah read through the offer carefully, noting the substantial increase in responsibility and the opportunity to influence emergency response policy at the highest levels of government. 3 years ago, she would have considered such a position completely beyond her reach. Today, it represented the natural progression of expertise that had finally found its proper application. Her phone rang, interrupting her review of the federal job offer. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "This is Sarah Martinez." "Ms. Martinez, this is Jennifer Hendrickson. I hope you remember us. You rescued our family in the Cascade Forest last year." "Of course I remember you, Jennifer. How are you and your family doing?" "We're wonderful, and that's actually why I'm calling. Emma, our daughter, just started her freshman year at Oregon State University, studying forestry and emergency management. She says your story inspired her to pursue a career in wilderness rescue, and she's hoping to follow the same path you took in developing expertise outside of traditional academic programs." Sarah felt a warm sense of satisfaction at hearing about Emma's career choice. "That's fantastic news. Please tell Emma that I'd be happy to serve as a mentor and help her develop the kind of comprehensive skills that emergency response work requires." "Actually, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Emma is particularly interested in the psychological aspects of search and rescue, understanding how people behave in emergency situations. She thinks there's still a lot of research to be done in that area." After ending the call with Jennifer, Sarah sat quietly in her office, considering the unexpected continuity between her past and her future. Her rescue of the Hendrickson family had not only transformed her own career, but had also inspired the next generation of emergency response professionals. Over the following weeks, Sarah made her decision about the federal position. She accepted the role as Director of Wilderness Search Psychology, but negotiated terms that would allow her to continue field operations and maintain her connection to actual rescue work. The bureaucratic aspects of government service held little appeal, but the opportunity to influence policy and training on a national scale was too important to decline. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in the Cascade National Forest, this time leading a training exercise for newly appointed emergency response specialists from across the western United States. The group included experienced law enforcement officers, firefighters, paramedics, and Forest Service personnel who were learning advanced search techniques. "The most important lesson I can share with you," Sarah told the assembled trainees as they stood near the location where she had once rescued the Hendrickson family, "is that expertise develops through persistent effort and systematic learning, regardless of your official job title or other people's recognition of your capabilities." She gestured toward the forest around them. "Every person lost in terrain like this represents someone's family member, someone's loved one who is depending on our knowledge and skills to bring them home safely. That responsibility requires us to be the best possible versions of ourselves, prepared for challenges that may not fit standard procedures or conventional approaches." As the training exercise concluded and the participants prepared to return to their home agencies, several approached Sarah with questions about career development and skill acquisition. She found herself thinking about her own journey from administrative coordinator to national expert, and the countless small decisions and patient preparations that had made that transformation possible. Standing in the forest where her career had truly begun, Sarah reflected on the simple truth that had guided her throughout the entire process. Excellence is rarely about dramatic moments or sudden recognition. Excellence is about showing up consistently, developing capabilities systematically, and being ready to act when the moment demands your very best. The radio on her belt crackled to life. "Director Martinez, we have a missing family situation developing in the Olympic National Forest. Local teams are requesting your immediate consultation." Sarah smiled as she headed toward her vehicle. Some things never changed. There would always be people in need of rescue, challenges requiring expertise, and opportunities to prove that capabilities matter more than assumptions. As she drove toward her next assignment, Sarah realized that her transformation from just a receptionist to Director of Wilderness Search Psychology had never really been about changing other people's perceptions. It had been about creating opportunities to demonstrate the expertise she had always possessed, and then being bold enough to act when those opportunities finally arrived. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, full of challenges that would require everything she had learned, everything she had practiced, and everything she had prepared for during those years when her potential remained invisible to everyone around her. Today, like every day since that stormy night when she had first proven herself, Sarah was ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.